Welcome to Newsmax TV. I'm Kathleen Walter. With us now from Washington is Representative Michael Burgess, Republican from Texas, and a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And Representative Burgess, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start with the developing story right now. President Obama's proposal of a so-called grand bargain for middle-class jobs that would cut the U.S. corporate tax rate and use billions in revenues generated by a business tax overhaul to fund job-creating projects. How do you view this proposal?
Well, please put me down in the skeptical column, if not downright negative. Look, this president has had now, 4.5 years. Job creation under this administration has been absolutely dismal. In fact, during the first part of his administration, I sat on a committee called the Joint Economic Committee, and on that committee we would hear from people like Christine Romer and Larry Summers, the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and it was pretty clear to me at that time that we had an administration that was uniquely anti-employer. So you have an administration that's anti-employer. Is it any surprise that job creation suffers under such a helm? And I think we've seen, obviously, the results of that. Now, the president seems to love the idea of stimulus. He loves the idea of pumping a lot of money into government programs. To date, though, that has not worked. So that's why I would say count me as in the skeptical column on this. The fact of the matter is, on the ground back in Texas, job creation is happening. There are jobs to be had for people who are willing to work, and as a consequence, you had 5 million people move to Texas between 2000 and 2010, and the reason for that is because with a light regulatory touch, our job climate is really something that is the envy of many states.
Now, at least 12 Republican senators have said that they will not sign a spending bill that includes funding for Obamacare. In addition, at least 69 House Republicans want a continuing resolution that would cut Obamacare financing entirely. Meantime, the president plans to veto any bill that doesn't roll back sequester cuts, and Harry Reid says he has no interest in continuing government funding at sequestration levels. Are you concerned we're on track for a government shutdown?
Well, if the president is serious about making a threat like that he will veto any bill that doesn't undo the sequester, then I guess that's where we're headed. I would like to remove all funding from implementation of the Affordable Care Act. I get the joke that some of the funding is mandatory and it's hard to remove in a discretionary spending bill. But if the president's position is, without undoing the sequester, I'm not signing anything, that's preposterous. Remember, the sequester is a law that he signed, was developed by his administration, was used so that he would not have to face another debt limit crisis before he faced the electorate in 2012. So this is his legacy. And honestly, I would be more protective of the sequester than I would be worried about Obamacare funding at this point. The sequester is the one thing that has managed to bring our spending down to levels that are certainly not admirable, but at least defensible. And anything that undoes the sequester is, I think the president is asking for trouble.
Now, speaking of Obamacare, you recently voiced concern about Obamacare enrollment fallout, and after spending more than 3 decades practicing medicine in North Texas, you have a unique perspective on this. Can you share with us your concerns?
Well, I've got a lot of concerns, and one of them, of course, is that the president, or Valerie Jarrett, more appropriately, on July 2nd, said, hey, that employer mandate, let's just forget about it for a year. And then 3 days later, what did they have to do? They said, oh, yeah, by the way, since we're not collecting the data, we are going to rely on people to tell us the truth as to whether or not they're eligible for a subsidy in the exchange. Self-attestation is the technical term for it. Well, I trust people to tell the truth also, but I also know, like Ronald Reagan, trust but verify. And then it's almost in the same motion. Last week they said we're going to cut the number of inspectors in the Department of Health and Human Services Inspector General Department. Well, wait a minute. This is a recipe for disaster. You're almost begging people to take advantage of you, and the person who loses in this transaction is the taxpayer, and it is our obligation to protect the taxpayer.
On Monday, Florida's insurance commissioner said that health insurance rates in Florida will rise by 5 to 20% in the small group market and 30 to 40% in the individuals market as the Affordable Care Act's guaranteed coverage rule takes effect next year. Will this be the norm in other states as well? And what do you see as the fallout of higher insurance rates for Americans already struggling in this really tough economy?
I think you've already seen the game plan here from the administration. Any state that is perhaps a little bit better under the Affordable Care Act, they're going to talk up in a big way, even if they have to manipulate the data. A lot of people are finding in states like Florida, where historically the insurance market has not had the same types of pressures of, say, a New York and New Jersey with guaranteed issue and community rating. It's going to go down in markets like New York and New Jersey. It's going to go up. Costs are going to go up in other states. So you'll see that will be the rhetorical back and forth that you will hear the administration say, look, it's working. You'll have House conservatives say, no, it's not. And we'll each point to respective states as evidence of that. I think the takeaway here is the Affordable Care Act is almost doomed to failure. But it's not going to be a quick failure. It's not going to be a painless failure. It's going to be a slow and protracted failure. And this is part of the reason. In some states, people will be able to say, hey, look, it's not so bad. In other states, they're going to say this is absolutely dreadful. What I do suspect is that probably 14, 15 months from now, the open enrollment period starts October 1st. About a year after that, when people begin to see the effect on their insurance rates in both the individual small group market and even the large group market, I think that's when the major pushback is going to come from the population. Interestingly, that's just a few weeks ahead of the 2014 election.
Let's turn now to a story of great consequence to your home state of Texas, and that is Attorney General Eric Holder's announcement that the Justice Department will ask a federal court to subject Texas to a pre-clearance requirement, which the Supreme Court just struck down, for all its proposed changes to voting laws for the next decade. How do you view this move by the Attorney General, and how do you see this playing out in Texas?
Well, I think the state of Texas Attorney General actually anticipated this to some degree, so they were prepared for this to happen. Obviously, it is clearly, in my opinion, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, I'm just a simple country doctor, but it's an abuse of power for Eric Holder to say he is the final arbiter even over and above the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court issued their ruling on this, and then he goes to a little used part of Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act and said, no, my way shall prevail. Obviously, he's going to be challenged on this. He's up against a pretty strong challenge from Greg Abbott in the state of Texas, and as you know, Greg Abbott also has his own political ambitions, and I expect you will hear a great deal about this in the coming months. But isn't it preposterous that an attorney general who's been held in both civil and criminal contempt by the United States Congress then seeks to go above the Supreme Court? It really is above beyond the pale.
And turning to immigration now, a huge issue for the Lone Star State. The House will begin voting on immigration reform this fall. What will the House do with the 11 million immigrants here in the U.S. illegally? And Speaker Boehner says he won't bring up the Senate bill for a vote without majority support. Should the House vote on the Senate plan?
Well, first off, on the Senate bill, their bill does have a problem and has not even arrived at the House yet because it obviously has taxing provisions which make it there are serious constitutional problems with the Senate-passed bill. Look, the United States is the most welcoming country of any country as far as bringing in new citizens. And, aren't we all fortunate to live here? The United States brings in about 1 million people a year legally. And as a consequence, over the 11 years that I've been here, what is that? That's 11 million people that have come into the country the proper way. Now, if you're going to tell me that the 11 million people who are here without benefit of citizenship today are the same 11 million who were here, or at least purported to be here when I first ran for Congress 11 years ago, it just doesn't make sense. Clearly, that is a population that changes. The number, for whatever reason, by the population experts has not changed. But I think, honestly, the only part of our immigration system that is broken is the fact that border enforcement, interior enforcement, employer verification have been things that have been left to languish, and perhaps we ought to turn our attention to those things first, as well as enforcing existing law before we start creating whole new classes of individuals. And you just want to talk about the effect of the Affordable Care Act on a new registered provisional immigrant status. What are you going to do to the working men and women who are legally in this country? If you say that no one who's a registered provisional immigrant under the Senate's language would be eligible for the Affordable Care Act, then guess what? There's an incentive for employers to hire those individuals first, because they would not be penalized for not providing them health insurance because they're ineligible under the current statute of Obamacare. We create a whole lot more problems when we start down that road. Let's fix some of the things that are fixable. Again, employee verification, interior enforcement, and border security. Enforce those laws that are already on the books that should be enforced, and let's not try to change everything, especially when you've got a United States Congress with an approval rating of 8%.
Last question for you, Representative Burgess. President Obama recently said that the Keystone XL pipeline wouldn't create that many jobs. How do you view that statement?
Look, President Obama and his administration do not have a good track record as far as functioning as job creators. Texas is an energy state. A vast and significant number of jobs are created in the energy sector in Texas every single day. The Keystone Pipeline would add to the milieu that already is very positive in terms of job creation, and I quite honestly don't think the president knows whereof he speaks on this one.
All right, Representative Michael Burgess, Republican from Texas. So great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.